I'm Ed Amoroso from Tag Cyber, and I'm here with my friend Paolo Shakarian, who is the co-founder and CEO of CyberCon. How are you doing?
Doing well, Ed. Thanks for having me.
Welcome to New York.
Yeah.
It's wonderful to have you here.
Oh, good.
Hey, let's start. Why don't you tell us a little bit about the CyberCon platform and what it does and kind of the benefits that you offer your customers?
Yeah, so the CyberCon platform, we initially developed it under funding from the U.S. intelligence community. And it was really designed to take care of a lot of the heavy lifting needed to take information gathered from malicious hacker communities and apply a layer of artificial intelligence. And what we had shown in our work for the government is that we could predict various types of cyber attacks in different ways. And more recently, we've worked with several large Fortune 500 companies that are our clients to bring this to market.
Now, the dark web is kind of an important piece of what you guys do in sort of gathering intelligence and so on. Tell me a little bit about how that works, where we're sort of doing the analysis.
Yeah, so of course, information from the deep web, dark web, even social media, these are all very important sources. And the reason why they're important is because we have found that you can extract signal from them to be used in machine learning algorithms to do this kind of prediction. As important as it is, our value to customers is actually not around the data as much as it's around the ability to predict. In many ways, the data is like the fuel that allows us to drive this, new Ferrari.
Mm-hmm. Now let's talk briefly about the role of AI, AI in the context of threat intelligence. You mentioned AI. I think that is part of what you guys do. It's part of the processing. What's sort of your philosophy in that sense?
Well, so I began my career as an intelligence analyst in the Army, actually, and learning from that and doing very rewarding work on finding terrorists and insurgents and this kind of thing, I came to realize that there's just frankly a lot of manual effort in doing that.
Yeah.
And after I left the Army, I noticed a lot of my friends actually went on to work doing threat intel work in large companies all over the country, in the cyberspace. And what I noticed in talking to them is that threat intelligence has become very focused on mainly incident response, responding to events, which in some ways is a little bit backwards because they're spending their time as intel analysts more figuring out what happened as opposed to trying to predict what's coming next. On top of that, there's a lot of different security functions such as vulnerability management, vendor risk management, aspects of security operations that they're a little bit underserved with intelligence information, even at the largest companies. And so, what our philosophy is that, well, at some point, you have to address the lack of analysts because there's a lot of work to do, there's a very limited talent pool, and quite frankly, they're starting to get expensive. Mm-hmm. And what we have found is that using artificial intelligence is a way to address this. And we have had our roots in working on these type of problems over the last decade because a lot of the study about applying artificial intelligence to better understand and predict the actions of threat actors sort of began under some Department of Defense funding about 10 years back. Right. And it's a special brand of AI. It's a brand of AI that accounts for an adaptive adversary. And really that's what you need in order to start replicating the intuitions of an analyst and applying it in very specific security functions across the board.
Mm-hmm. Now, specifically, the algorithms, are they machine learning based? And kind of how does that work? Are you training some engines somewhere to recognize patterns? Is that how the technology works?
So it's a layered approach. There was a study a couple years back by Sandia National Labs that found that 40 to 70% of any machine learning or AI project is spent on cleaning, normalizing, and gathering data.
Wow.
And so what we did in our base platform is we worked really hard to take care of all that stuff up front, so then it's easy to build various machine learning applications to support different cybersecurity functions. So for example, our solution for vulnerability prioritization, we have associated the information from our data sources with which vulnerabilities are going to be exploited using some advanced models of the adversary. Likewise, our solution for vendor risk management is focused on finding abnormalities in the hacker discussions about that third party, so it could be pointed out to the person in charge of managing third-party vendors. And so depending on the application is how how we have created those products, but underneath really is what required to be able to not just collect data, but make sure it's normalized, make sure it's cleaned, make sure that different indicators are extracted ahead of time, and we even go so far as to map out the relationships amongst the malicious actors who are holding these conversations.
That's interesting. You know, you mentioned adaptive threat, so I think that's probably a key driver in your work and also in the platform. What is an adaptive threat and why is that important in the context of threat intelligence?
So an adaptive threat is really what makes cybersecurity necessary. Because if you think about it, if you know what the threat's going to do, if his behavior is that regular, we can address cyber threats using an appliance, and that's called IT.
Yeah. So it's the difference between reliability and security in a sense, right?
Oh, I think you're exactly right. Because a failure due to environmental concerns, down to the power lines and all this, these can be predicted based on the calendar, based on environmental factors.
A probabilistic thing.
Yeah. Whereas if you have a bad guy who's actively trying to pursue a goal, that's a whole different ball of wax.
Yeah. So as you guys are chasing these adaptive threats, I guess the security has to be dynamic, right? Is that the whole idea? Instead of like just putting this defense in place, there it's done, it's good, we're done forever. You have to constantly not only deal with an adaptive threat, but you need to build an adaptive defense. Am I thinking about that right?
Yeah, I would say so. And I mean, going back to kind of the military analogy, we would do what were called intelligence-driven operations, where we would consider what the bad guy was most likely to do and use that to inform our defenses, inform what we were doing operationally. And that's really where cybersecurity needs to move. But again, like I said, the big problem is there simply is not enough analysts to go around. And there's not enough analysts to cover these different security functions. And then that's where machine learning and AI come in, because if you can imbue all your security functions with a level of AI that's designed to model the threat, now you're moving more toward an adaptive approach and you're doing it in a cost-effective way.
Is that problem of sort of a lack of analysts, is that way bigger as you go mid-market and down? I would think like the huge banks, big budget, they can get analysts, I think. But I can imagine mid-market, it's almost impossible to find analysts.
Well, I think it's even an issue at the larger companies too, because take vulnerability management, for example. If you're a large bank and you literally have millions of software vulnerabilities, that's a lot of stuff to have to go through for an analyst. And so there's a whole, there's the manual work of identifying information about each vulnerability, and then there is what becomes a subjective call with an analyst about determining likelihood of attack. Now, so you have a lot of work and you have a lot of subjectivity that could change with personnel rotation. So machine learning can address both of these things. And then certainly going down market, it's less of the size of the organization, more of limitations of amount of personnel, but the problem ends up being the same.
So you could argue it's not even whether you can find enough analysts. Probably not a good strategy to just throw human beings at this problem. I guess am I saying that right?
Yeah, I would say so.
The technology scales.
Yeah, and really the key is that if you have an analyst and he or she makes an error due to normal human biases, that error is going to not be systematic. So you can't track it down, you can't identify the sources of that. Moving to a more algorithmic approach, especially if the algorithms you're using are like what we have, where it provides a level of transparency that tells the user why it made a certain decision, what data drove it to make that prediction about the threat. Now you have an understanding of where that result came from, and if there's something that you disagree with, it's easier to track down in a systematic way.
Makes sense. Makes sense. Now, you make the distinction in a lot of your work about sort of the difference between information and data in the context of threat intelligence. It's kind of subtle. Take me through the difference there, and why a enterprise security team would care about that difference.
Well, I think the difference is quite important, and we've really found this with our discussions with CISOs, in that when you're selling something to a CISO that's going to be used by the threat intelligence team, that value is about the data. But that there's an extra expense that CISO has to pay besides the price, and that is the work his analysts have to do to massage that information and make it usable by the organization. When you start talking about prediction and selling information about what the threat is going to do, their most likely courses of action, and that information can be ingested directly into a security function like vulnerability management or vendor risk management or operations, and it can integrate with those workflows, bypassing the threat intel guy, basically a virtual analyst. Now you're providing a value based on information, and that's what we're trying to do. Now, I don't think that you're going to see CISOs retiring their threat intelligence teams anytime soon. I still think there's value in having, human analysts involved. I just think that the amount of work that really needs to be done is much greater than the size of these teams.
Yeah. Another point that you often make in your discussion around platform is kind of the difference between a risk-based approach and a threat-based approach. I've heard you describe that before. Why don't you share with us kind of what are the relative pros and cons of each?
So I think that these are both inherently complementary.
Yeah.
Risk-based approach is all about looking at what's most valuable to me that I need to defend.
Yeah.
Whereas the threat-based approach is looking at what is the adversary most likely going to attack. Now, if you take a risk-based approach, and let's say you identify a server that is, for whatever reason, is critical to the organization. Maybe it's a certain e-commerce server, or maybe it's something that intellectual property is stored on. And you say, okay, we're going to batten down the hatches on that thing. We're going to make sure all vulnerabilities are patched, and so on and so forth. And you do it at the expense of maybe patching some, outlying endpoint. But if the user of that endpoint is hitting that server, and that user of that endpoint gets totally compromised, now you have not done a good job protecting that server, because the adversary has identified an avenue of approach through that endpoint that was unprotected. With a threat-based approach, focusing on what the threat is most likely to do, you are more conscious of protecting some of these things that might seem as low-hanging fruit. But these are blocking based on the capability of the adversary.
I see.
And so our belief is that threat-based approach should have primacy, but I think both can work together to provide a holistic approach to security.
And this threat-based approach allows you, in a sense, to combine local vulnerability information with the intelligence around threat to basically prioritize or make the prioritization a little better. Am I saying that like you'd be able to be more predictive about which vulnerabilities are likely to be exploited? Is that the idea?
Yeah, that's essentially the idea. So when our customers use our platform for vulnerability prioritization, they're taking the result of the vulnerability scan. And we've noticed with most customers, there's this portion of the workflow where they have the result of the vulnerability scan from Nessus or Qualys or whatever, and it's going to a local database or some kind of spreadsheet sort of thing. And the prioritization occurs at that point, and then the results get sent off to IT to patch according to the priority list. Well, at that point is normally where most customers seem to ingest the information from our platform. So it takes the vulnerabilities from the scan, prioritizes them based on the probability hackers will use them, and also tags on information about what the hackers are saying about each vulnerability. So it's a 1-2 punch. We have this very accurate probability that we have shown in about 3 peer-reviewed studies that's 20 times better accuracy than anything else out there, coupled with data about what hackers are really saying about this. And we've even had customers go so far as to actually show this in slides to their board, because they're demonstrating, one, that they've taken a quantified approach to threat, which, all things being equal, that is a very attractive way of doing business for the higher level executives. But at the same time, they've humanized the threat, which was, when I heard that one of our customers did that, it was kind of a neat thing once I thought about it, because now they've taken what many higher level executives and board members may perceive as a random event, like what we were talking about earlier. And they show that, this is the result of human action. This is the result of bad guys, and this is what they're intending to do. And because we took a quantified approach, we're blocking them. And that's really where I think the value comes in.
That's great. How are you enjoying running a startup? I know you've had a varied background in government and academic, obviously, at Arizona State. How's it been so far running a startup?
It's a very exciting thing to have the opportunity to do.
And you work with your wife in the business.
Yes. My wife is the CTO, and so she owns all of the engineers and does a really good job of making sure that the product stays up and running, and the enhancements get done in a timely manner, that we respond to customer inquiries about little tweaks here and there. I like it because it brings together a lot of things that I've done in different jobs over the years. All the lessons about leadership I've learned from the military, the insights I've gained about intelligence, and of course the technical aspects of machine learning and cybersecurity. And for her as well, she's also led teams in the past, and she's had a lot of experience in data collection and working on modeling different kinds of threat actors over the years. And so it's really it's been a big passion project for both of us.
That's wonderful. When a customer does a POC with you, what are kind of the objectives of a POC, and what do you think they should be expecting if they call you up and they say, hey, let's try it? What do you think are the kind of the outcomes that you would consider to be very attractive?
Well, I think the nice thing about the POC is that we can provide value to a customer during the POC, because essentially most customers that we deal with, they're taking the results of their most recent vulnerability scan, aligning it against our data, and we help them through that with things like some customized Python scripts to fully integrate with their workflow, so they get integration during the POC, and they get actionable results in the POC, because they understand which vulnerabilities are likely to be targeted, as well as, like I was saying before, why. Which hackers are discussing that. So the format of the results, for some customers, they want a report, and we can produce that. Some customers want either a CSV or JSON that can be directly imported into a custom database, or their SIM, or their vulnerability management platform, and we've done that repeatedly in the past. But again, it's all about getting this result to the customer, so they can understand which of the vulnerabilities are targeted, and helping them integrate in the POC.
So Paolo, in the context of a POC with a client, how long does it take before they see some real value out of the engagement?
Well, it's a very fast time to value, and it's a very light lift for the CISO, because we have already designed import filters around all the common vulnerability scanners. The results, if the CISO wants to take the step and do integration during the POC, Normally this takes about a week or two in guiding his people, but we don't even have to go that far. We can even just take the results of the vuln scan on our end and produce what the output would look like, either in a formatted report or in a spreadsheet or something like this. And that can be done in a day or two, barring paperwork and this kind of thing. So it's a very rapid time to value. It requires a very low amount of work on the end of the CISO. And and the feedback we've been getting from these has been very positive, because it's, I think, a very straightforward thing of what we're promising. And for us, we have the right platform to deliver on that.
I hope you do a lot of engagements with clients. I think what you're doing is wonderful.
Thanks for that.
I hope you come back and visit as you continue to grow. I suspect you guys are going to be a very successful organization. And please send my regards to your team and to your wife. Thanks for coming.
Thank you very much.
It was wonderful having you here.
Thank you.
Great. And we will see you next time.